Ladies and gentlemen, my name is AirsickHydra, and in this video we're going to be talking about Ashen and providing some critique and review. Now, something I want to get off of my chest before we get started here is, yes, I've played Dark Souls, and yes, I've enjoyed it. It's a wonderful game, but this is not going to be a 30 to 40 minute video ranting about how great that game is, nor is it going to be a video complaining about all the things that was in that game that is not present within this. You will forgive me for being a little bit salty. I've just read 5 to 6 text-based article-style reviews, and not a single one of them has, as of yet, described anything that makes this game unique or different, and has basically neglected that in place of the author having just a good moan because they're clearly a Dark Souls fan. I'm hopeful that this video will be useful to you as a consumer in terms of making your decision about this product to decide whether or not it may be enjoyable for you. Now, let us get started. Rant and waffle aside, deep breath. We're going to talk about the actual game. To start off with, we have a traditional fantasy-based setting, a story of light versus dark, of deities and gods, and one in particular having gone missing. It is our job to bring them back. Obviously, there's something fairly special about our protagonist. We have been touched, and this, well, is kind of our job to do. It's an age-old classic story as well as setting, and let's face it, it is a little bit on the shallow side. There is a little bit of prettiness and a little bit of glitter sprinkled around with some pretty nice looking cutscenes and certainly some nice animations within these. But that being said, the story for many, I think, is a little bit of the shallow side. You will know what you're doing and you will know why you're doing it, but the motivations and reasoning for doing it and the actual, let's say, relationships you may have between yourself and other characters are going to be very, very difficult to get into. One of the reasons contributing to this may be the fact that no one has any faces or facial expressions. I personally don't have a massive gripe against this in terms of aesthetics, but I think it does have a knock-on effect in terms of how you interact with NPCs. Certainly in terms of their voice acting too, there's not a lot that goes on in terms of NPCs that's going to make you particularly fond of them or really give a damn about them. Everyone in my town right now could die, and I wouldn't really know who's who and wouldn't really care all that much. That being said though, the main story is still fairly captivating, and you will find yourself on occasion having your jaw lower a couple of inches just admiring what's going on. Let's talk about the actual gameplay itself though, something far more important in a game of this type. The gameplay itself, when you log in, will start off by presenting you with your character design, and this is where you take the role of a generic protagonist, and I really mean generic because you don't have any class structure or choices to make aside from your hair, your facial hair, your skin colour, and of course your gender. That is pretty much it in terms of choice, so you can hop on into the game with your generic character. This, of course, we will return to when it comes to replay value and discussion of that nature. I know there will be a few eyebrows being raised thus far, certainly an interesting choice to make. Jumping into the game, you're then presented with, I will say, a well-equipped and well laid out and well presented gradual tutorial that presents to you the controls and the things to do in order to hopefully succeed in combat, and this will eventually point you to the direction that this is very much like Dark Souls-esque combat. It is reactionary, it is timing based, and it will rely on you reading and listening to basically audio and visual cues to dodge and mitigate damage, either by blocking or dodging. And of course you will have to try and do damage to those that are trying to damage you. This could be anything from large scale monsters to small individual people, humanoids, to gritty looking demons and things of that nature. There really are some quite interesting quirky character designs and things of that nature. I've very much enjoyed this. The combat itself, again, very similar to Dark Souls in terms of, if not identical to, in terms of control layout, and of course plenty of customization available to the layout to change the buttons as you please. It can be described as more floaty, more fluid, faster. Perhaps the word crisp could come in, and this is where a degree of subjectivity will be in the game. I have seen reviews that have stated that the combat lacks the heaviness and the clunk and the methodical nature that came with the D-word game. Whereas, personally, I see the actual current combat within Ashen as a little bit faster, more fluid and crisper, and clearly there are just simply two different directions. I see this game as having an intentionally different feel to its combat, despite it being very similar in nature. It may or may not appeal to you. You can simply see it. It's something very kinesthetic. It's something when you play it, you'll say, yeah, this does feel a little bit different. It's the way the character moves and slightly overshoots where you move them to. They change direction a little bit faster. Everything seems to happen with a little bit of extra, perhaps floatiness or crispness. Again, it may be something that some enjoy or some don't. The same goes for all audio and visuals that accompany this. When you attack an enemy, things generally do make impact sounds, and for the most part, animation and ragdoll physics are well implemented, and things are pretty neat and tidy, and I would say to a pretty decent standard. However, again, everything is a little bit lighter. There are, of course, heavier weapons you can use, but for the most part, it is certainly different. Now, when it comes to combat as well, it's worth mentioning the difficulty of this game, because this is, of course, going to be fairly tough. Timing-based combat games are all about the skill and the execution of the combat system. That's really what these games all boil down to. Are you going to master this? Are you going to get good at it? Because it's going to punish you if you make mistakes. Games like this require your full attention, and this one is really no different. If anything, there is perhaps even a little bit of an overemphasis on hidden enemies that hide within certain locations. Could be on the ceiling, could be behind pillars. If you go walking around blasé, you will, on occasion, lose 2/3, perhaps even all of your health instantly without any warning at all. This, at times, can be a little bit frustrating, but it does basically teach you as a player to be very, very careful. That being said, though, there is one huge and colossal difference between this game's core combat design and the other games of this genre, and this is the passive companion system. You have a compadre with you at all times. They are simply following you around, and they are doing their stuff, strutting their thing. And this is a nice system. It's something nice to have, and I would say many players will probably enjoy this. Simply put, it takes a little bit of stress off of you. You will have opportunities where mobs will be attacking your ally, and there will be opportunities where you are dodging and your ally is attacking it. You can resurrect them as well should they go down, and generally speaking, it takes a little bit of the pressure off of you. They can also resurrect you if you die, let's say due to a bit of bad luck with a basic enemy, something that really shouldn't have happened. They can probably kill that enemy and then resurrect you. They're fairly competent, but don't get me wrong, they have absolutely no chance of killing a boss. Although, for the 2 boss battles I have completed, they are capable of basically hanging in there and staying alive through the boss battle, should you be somewhat cautious with them. So it's nice to see the NPCs be fairly useful. Now, it's also worth mentioning here that the cooperative function with this game is really a little bit odd. This passive co-op can match you with other humanoids. These will be people in the same zone that reportedly will be in a similar area to you, so it won't just put you with someone else the other side of the map. And a humanoid can take over your NPC. And that's wonderful. They will still look like an NPC though, and you will have no real indicator that it's a humanoid other than them moving like a human would, and probably not doing what you want them to. For me, it's a little bit of a questionable feature to make them look like an NPC. This reminds me a lot of Fable, back when Fable implemented this sort of feature. The problem is they're very much designed to be sort of drop in and drop out. So the moment you go back to your town, they are removed from your session. This also applies when you activate one of the stones, which is basically a checkpoint which will refill your health but also reset the map. Hey presto, if you had a friend inside the game, it's going to kick them out. They can get back in again, of course, but this does mean that the system is going to be slightly less fluid, perhaps, than a game where they are within your instance permanently. That being said, I do understand and I do appreciate the fact that when you reset the world, if your compadre was in combat somewhere, just suddenly resetting it for them would kind of make no sense. So it's a system that has its pros and cons, and I like the idea of it, but I will be honest with you, I've had it turned off for the majority of the time because having people in the game actually caused more of a nuisance than a help for myself. Now we come to the actual weapon system of the game and the weapons themselves. What I would say within the game is approximately every 10 to 15 minutes I have found a different weapon, and these have varied quite immensely, and certainly some have been visually pleasing, I would say. Some have been more aesthetic than others. You have an array of shields and offhands as well, which can vary between a lantern, which could give you extra bonuses, as well as obviously shedding some light on things, to a glorious shield, which of course can be used to block. Now, weapons themselves do each have their own attack combination. Some will do swing, swing, swing. Some will do swing, 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 swing. Some will do swing, swing, swing. You get the idea. There is quite a bit of choice available. However, aside from attack pattern and stamina usage, the only things really separating weapons are the damage values, where we have a light value and a heavy value, being a left click and a right click. The same goes for stun percentage of light and heavy, and we also have critical hit chance. As of yet, within the first 6 hours of gameplay, this is more or less all that I have to say in terms of the customization available to the actual weapons. There are some minor things you can also do with your character that actually, in all fairness, are a little bit less minor, which I think we should probably talk about as well. But thus far, in terms of weapon variety, there is certainly a fair bit to try, and there's certainly a fair few that again will give you some degree of customization perhaps. If we load up our character screen now, we can access our talismans. Now, these are the buffs available to your character. The more depth you get into the game, the further you get into the game, the more of these you will unlock. The first time you ever see this customization system, you will only have access to 4. So to begin with, within the early game, there's really not a lot of choice in terms of upgrades, and I do think that's perhaps something the game missed out on in terms of perhaps even replay value. There's not a lot of A/B choice in terms of leveling and progression. There simply seems to be a lot of, here are some upgrades, and this is what you can have, take it or leave it. Can you afford it or not? But for example, we can go for some extra damage resistance, especially when we leave our base or have a companion nearby. We can go for an extra stun percent chance when we have a lantern equipped in the offhand, one of my personal favourites. And we can go for bonus health and things of that nature. We also have something we can place in the middle, which is a, let's say, a more powerful talisman. This one, for example, when I deal hits to an enemy, it then hits them as well. So basically there's plenty of similar items in many similar games that do this. It mimics your own attacks and does some extra damage, much like a familiar might, but as soon as you get hit, the orbs disappear and it goes back to sort of its neutral stance. In terms of customization, this isn't going to feel earth-shattering. There are also a few costumes and things of that nature, although I will confess I think we've probably deleted all of them already. And one last thing to discuss while we are here is that the actual base itself grows larger and larger the further into the game you get. So what started off in this area as being a very bleak and barren area, eventually, once you have completed the game, will end up resembling more of a town and establishment. This, as you can see, is the beginnings of a small tavern of sorts. You can notice the roof beams being placed up. This is a nice touch, and infrequently coming back here, you are constantly greeted with a little bit of change. And this, I would say, is one of those instances where the developers have shown some competence in terms of game design. There are some features within this game that, simply put, just make a little bit of sense. They're nice to have, and many games that miss these features end up feeling a lot emptier as a result. Now, shout out to the clothing again, which provides some very minor and, well, I could even perhaps use the word trivial changes, but again, I'm fairly early on within the game. The difference of damage reduction, stamina cost, etc. 15% stamina cost, if that goes up to 30 by endgame, is going to be fairly significant, but it will be fairly slow to unlock these, and of course there is naturally a little bit of a fashion element to this. And now we come to talk about replay value, one of perhaps the most important variables to bring into a review if we're discussing value for money, because I'm aware, despite this not being my personal view, that many players out there want far more than an hour per dollar invested in order for them to perceive a game as being worth their money. Now, this game itself has a 20-hour campaign. I believe that this will probably be considerably longer if you are somewhat slow and methodical like me and just simply like like exploring every nook and cranny. For those that try and just race through the quests, will it be shorter? Well, I don't really know, but 20 hours is the approximate for completion. Now the question therefore comes, what are we going to do after we've completed it, Hydra? And that is where some of the previous points become very, very relevant. Firstly, those of you that like variation in replays are probably going to be disappointed, or rather it's just not simply going to satisfy that. We already know that our customization within this game, or our gameplay variation, really comes from changing weapons, and of course the occasional trinket to bolster those weapons, but this can be done during your primary playthrough anyway. At any point you can change something for something else without any long-term investments or punishing measures made for those that change builds frequently. It's basically the second playthrough going to be very, very similar to the first, with one exception. And again, this is not going to be for those of you that like variety. This is going to be for those of you that like to master a combat system during New Game Plus. Basically, their New Game Plus mode is a health decrease and a stamina decrease. So basically, you're going to have to spend more time dodging, blocking, doing less damage per second to an enemy, so fights are going to last longer. You're going to have to be dodging more. You'll be sort of doing a little bit less, just wiping out easy units and trash with a well-upgraded weapon. Every fight is going to be drawn out and a lot longer. Now, if that appeals to you, that appeals to you. Some people like going through Dark Souls games with very scantily clad characters and having a very challenging time. Others simply like replaying with different characters to try different things. You will know what you are, and you will know what you like as a player, or at least I would hope so, and if you don't, I challenge you to think about it. So, in conclusion, this game, I would say, and I would summarise this as not so much being a Dark Souls game. I would honestly say, I would think of this like a hybrid between Zelda and Dark Souls. I know, there is a bit of Dark Souls, yes, you can't deny it. The combat is very punishing, it's reaction and timing based, you lose your experience when you die, you go back to your body, you get it back, if you die twice you lose all of it, etc, etc. It's very much like Dark Souls in many, many respects. However, the way your character interacts with the world, the way the combat works, the way the way the game feels, I'd say it's actually far more like a Zelda game. The way you level up your health by finding things floating around the world and find the occasional feather giving you more stamina. It really does take me back to increasing those small little hearts on the top left-hand side of the screen over there. Will you like it? Will you not? I have no idea, but I hope that I've given you enough information to make that decision for yourself, guys. Me personally, I've had a good bit of fun with the game, and I'm looking forward to hopefully some extra content for it in future, and maybe trying to play through it with a friend if we can get our head around this co-op system. Guys, you have yourself a fantastic day. Remember to hit that like button and the subscribe button down below if you want to see more videos like this. Take care.